Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we're going to be reviewing the EasySMX X10 Mechanical Master, which is a controller that is compatible not only with the Nintendo Switch, but also compatible with PC, Steam Deck, iOS, and Android. Now this is a review I've been working on using this controller for over 6 weeks in a variety of different games, and I'm finally ready to give the verdict. Now this is currently a controller that sells on the EasySMX website for $69, putting it in a semi-premium controller category, but it is also available through other platforms like Amazon. I do want to mention that this review sample was provided to me by EasySMX, but this is not a sponsored video. All the conclusions and all the findings are 100% my honest opinion. Now, is this controller going to be a game changer that might actually have other companies jumping on board to what they're trying out? Well, that's what we're going to figure out in today's review. Just remember, if you are liking these videos, hit the like button and subscribe if you aren't already. So I do like to show a quick unboxing for the product. Obviously, we'll time skip about a month in the future after that, once I've had time to play around with the controller for the review section. But let's take a quick look at the packaging and get this unboxed. Now, the first thing I would like to mention is this is not the first EasySMX product I review or try out for the channel, and I've got to say they've upgraded their packaging a ton. Like, this really looks like premium packaging for a controller now. And I know what's important is what's in the package, not necessarily the package itself. But since this is always the first impression you're going to get for a controller or anything you buy is the packaging, to see that they put the time to make it now look premium actually gives me high hopes that their products are going to be even better than before. So now let's open her up and see if the inside matches the outside. And just before we actually get her cracked open, now that the plastic wrap is off, the glare should not be as bad. Let's take a look at what's actually on the packaging. Now that I have the plastic wrap off, the glare is gone. Let's just take a look, however, what's actually on this packaging. So first of all, I love to see this at the front. We have some of the main features, and these just aren't thrown away features. These are really important ones. Now, the sides of the box is just pure branding, so there's nothing to see there. The bottom neither is just basically the information on the manufacturer. Top is absolutely blank. And the back, once again, gives us the additional features, which are maybe not the main ones that people are going to be picking up this controller for. So it's nice to see that they really focused on the ones that make this controller a premium product on the front. And they put the standard ones that more controllers have on the back. So now with that all out of the way, let's crack her open. You know what? This is standard packaging, but it is very clean packaging. It's not just the controller thrown in there. You can see that this packaging is going to keep the controller stable, make sure it doesn't get damaged during transport. Like to see that. Especially since a lot of these controllers are coming from overseas, you want to make sure they get you in good shape. So we've got the controller itself. We've got the USB adapter if you're using it with a USB function like a PC. And then at the bottom here, we have our swappable faceplates, our swappable grips, and also our USB charging cable, which is braided. It feels extremely high quality. Honestly, I am getting positive vibes. Okay, so we are now 6 weeks later, and it's time to officially review the controller. I'm going to start off by saying I was very impressed by this controller, and I haven't been this impressed by a controller since the 8BitDo Ultimate. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean this controller is perfect, but I think it's going to check a lot of boxes for a lot of people. So now if we do a quick rundown of the features, just in case you want a quick breakdown. Number 1, motion control, fully compatible. Number 2, rumble with multiple rumble modes, and all you need to do is press this button and it'll cycle through 4 different strengths of rumble. Since a lot of people ask, I do also want to mention this controller can wake up your Switch by holding down the home button for 3 seconds, so that is a compatible option. Now, this controller also offers a pretty comprehensive turbo function, where you have button press turbo, you have continuous turbo, and with the button press turbo, you can also affect the speed of the turbo function. At the rear, we have 2 programmable buttons, which are macro compatible, so they can input multiple button functions. The controller does charge through USB-C, so you don't need a second type of cable. You can charge this with the actual standard Nintendo Switch charger. Basically, you're getting every major function of the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, minus the amiibo functionality, and the fact that the rumble is standard rumble rather than HD rumble. However, as I said earlier, the strength can be personalized. I do want to address right away, probably something that a lot of people are going to notice, is that yes, the button layout visually is the layout of the X input controller. So it basically looks like an Xbox controller in the positioning of the Y X button and the AB button. However, I've got to confirm 100%, don't be thrown off by this. If you put this controller in Switch mode, this is your Y button, this is your X button, this is your B button, this is your A button. You will, however, have to be a person that doesn't need to visually look at their buttons to know which button is the Y button, which button is the X button. And if you've been playing with Nintendo products for a while, most likely you're not looking at your buttons anymore. I did contact EasySMX to ask them if they did have a version with the Switch layout coming in the future. For the moment, there are no plans for that, but if they really want to capture the Switch audience, I do think they're going to need that because there are a lot of younger players and casual players that will be thrown off by the fact that visually the buttons aren't in the right spots. I did want to start out with that just because I think a lot of people watching the video are going to be questioning it, but now let's get what makes this controller an actually really good controller. Now, if we start with compatibility, it's as simple as a switch at the back. And you have 4 different compatibility modes. So you have the Nintendo Switch mode here at my left. Then you have the Bluetooth mode, which will give you generally Android and iOS compatibility. Then you have a wired mode, which will most likely be used with PC. And lastly, you have the dongle adapter, which you can use if you want to use this controller wirelessly, once again with a PC that maybe doesn't have Bluetooth. And if we look at physically, if you want to get a feeling for the controller, think right away of a current Xbox controller. Physically, the feeling, the size, even the weight feels very close to a standard Xbox controller. Now, if we continue on the physical side, one of the major advantages of this controller is that the front panel and both of the side grips are actually swappable. And they use magnets to hold them down. And I'm going to tell you right away, hold them down very securely. I've dropped this controller a couple of times and the panels do not fly off. So they can easily be swapped. And in the box itself, as you saw in the unboxing, we actually get a second color included. So all you need to do is basically get your thumb underneath here, pull up, and your panel will come right off. Now, as you can see, it's being held in by magnets at different spots. And if you want to swap it for the other faceplate, well, all you need to do is basically line it up and drop it in place. And your faceplate basically just snaps on as easy as that. Now for the side grips, it's the exact same idea. There's a little spot to fit your nail in here at the side. You pull up and it comes off, once again being held in by 2 different magnets. And if I want to swap out the color, basically I just pop it on, press down, and it's in place. It's one of the easiest faceplate swaps I've ever done on any controller. Now, there is another color of controller available. I think it's purple if I'm not mistaken. However, for the moment, at least on the website, I don't see that they're selling the panels separately. If the controller is a success, that's really something that I hope EasySMX goes full on in, even maybe offering alternate versions of faceplates. However, from a consumer's perspective, I'm pretty sure these faceplates are going to be 3D printable. And it is very easy to source these little magnets. You can find them online very easily. So I do think there's going to be a huge potential here for someone who wants to make really personalized controllers, even possibly with different themes for different games. Now I swapped right back to the silver faceplate. Honestly, it's just because it plays off better for the camera. Now visuals is a nice offering, but that's not what really blew me away about this controller. Number 1, it has Hall effect joysticks. So what that means is this controller should theoretically never drift. Does that mean that they won't one day fail for another reason? That could still happen, but at least for drift purposes, this controller should be drift proof. Now the triggers at the top offer you the best of both worlds, giving you nice mechanical triggers for the L and R, and for the ZR and ZL triggers, these are analog. Now, most likely they won't be used in most Switch games, but especially since this controller does PC as well, analog for the secondary triggers was very important to have included. Now, if we continue our way around, we've also got 2 programmable buttons at the back. And they are very easily programmable they're programmable directly from the controller, and they are even macro compatible, meaning that you can input multiple inputs to one of the each buttons. Now, that is going to be trial and error in different games. I've tried it on fighting games, and it really depends on which fighting game to see if it works or not. But it is a still nice thing that they're trying, and that macro compatibility is the same for every controller I've ever tried. It's never perfect. Now, if we look at the bottom here of the controller, what's really nice to see here is there's actually two dedicated buttons, one for the turbo function, one for controlling the various strength of the rumble function. And that is something very unique for this controller, to have dedicated buttons for that. And it's fun because most other controllers try to double down on face buttons for these functions, and it makes it really complex to use. Now, the only one button that has been sort of swapped is the capture button. The capture is actually activated on Nintendo Switch by double tapping the turbo button. That's the only one that's been displaced, because the button at the top here, the function button, is rather for assigning the macros or the reassigning the rear triggers to face buttons. Now we get to what's actually the best part of the whole controller, and I've kept this to last, so we've already looked at multiple advantages, and that's the fact that the face buttons and the D-pad have been swapped for mechanical triggers rather than membranes. Now, if you don't know what that means, for gaming purposes, it's almost the exact same difference as swapping from a membrane keyboard to a mechanical keyboard. What that means is that rather than having a membrane that you press down and has sort of an elasticity to it, each and every button is an individual switch. Now, this translates to the responsiveness on each button being really increased, and also just the press of each individual button have a much more satisfying feel, and really the ability to feel each press individually. Now, I didn't think that this was going to make as big of a difference as it ended up making. And I've got to say that playing 2D platformers with this D-pad being different mechanical switches is extremely satisfying, and really does make it easier to know that you're getting each input right. And I've actually enjoyed it so much that I really hope they one day make a D-pad focused controller, sort of along the lines of the 8BitDo Pro 2, but with a mechanical D-pad rather than a membrane one. And for the face buttons, if you're playing games where you occasionally have to mash the button, it makes it extremely easy to count the exact number of inputs you've done. So for fighting games and combos, it is also very, very pleasant. I'm not going to pretend that this is the first ever controller to offer mechanical buttons. It does exist in other controllers. However, to my knowledge, this is the only one in this particular price category, and it is the only one that I currently know is directly compatible with the Switch at under $100. However, of course, if you're aware of other models, please leave them down below in the comments. I'd be very interested to compare this to other controllers with mechanical switches. Now, before moving on, there is one last thing I do want to talk about, however, and that's the fact that mechanical switches over time can fail more often than membrane switches on average. Obviously, reviewing this controller over 2 months, I haven't seen any diminishment in the performance of the controller, but that's not the same as testing a controller over a year or two. Now, I can't tell you if this is going to have a high failure rate after a year or two of regular use. That is something to always keep in mind. However, if we're talking about immediate performance, this one is extremely impressive. Now, where I was really disappointed, however, is the fact that this controller is offering an app. However, if we compare it to something like the 8BitDo Ultimate, it is very bare bones, and it is a lot harder to use effectively. Now, the first odd choice here is that this app is only available through Android, and it actually doesn't have an iOS version or a PC version. Personally, I think that's eliminating a lot of people from the ability to use this app effectively, and it's a sort of a really weird choice. Now, the second part that is odd is the actual way to sync up this controller. You've actually got to put it into Bluetooth mode first, connect it with your phone Bluetooth-wise, then go into the app and connect it a second time, but with a different name through the Bluetooth recognition. It's a little weird. They have a video on the website. Just follow the steps in the video. It is doable, however. It's just a weird process. Now, once you have it connected, if you actually access your controller, you have the functions that are unlocked, but they are extremely basic. You basically can test the different button inputs. So if you click here, you have the test for the different inputs that you can do by touching your controller. And if you come back here, you can recalibrate your rockers, you can recalibrate the triggers, or you can update your firmware. And that's pretty much all the app currently unlocks. And to update your firmware, it is once again extremely weird. And if you want a quick hint, because it took me a while to figure this out, is your controller can actually not be connected to your phone in Bluetooth mode while you're trying to update the firmware. It's going to bug out and it's going to fail after a few percentage points. You basically have to connect your controller to another system like your Switch, but then connect the app through that secondary process that you're going to unlock in the Bluetooth pairing process, and then try to update the firmware, and it's going to work. It's a little weird of a process, and personally, I would have really preferred to just be able to plug this into a PC and update it that way through a USB cable, but, for the moment, this is what we have. So on the app side, it is slightly disappointing, but at least all the major functions of the controller can be directly accessed from the controller itself. As I said, I'm very impressed with this controller. And at this price category, it really puts it in direct competition with something like the 8BitDo Ultimate or the Nintendo Switch Pro controller itself. And there are a lot of reasons why you might actually choose this controller over those other two options. And honestly, I never thought that in the current Switch generation, I would see a controller that would possibly replace my 8BitDo Ultimate as my favorite overall controller. Now, I'm not prepared to put this one ahead of it yet because I do want to see long-term usage, but it is in competition. When I'm playing certain games that require a lot of button mashing, a lot of very precise inputs, the mechanical switches on this controller definitely do give it an advantage over other controllers. Comfort-wise as well, the front and rear texturized grips is a slight improvement over the 8BitDo Ultimate that only has texturized grips at the rear. However, as I showed earlier, the accompanying app really is very disappointing, leaving all the functions really directly on the controller, and that is something that the 8BitDo Ultimate has definitely over this controller. There's also the fact that visually, the inputs on the controller are the X inputs. Now, for a vast majority of gamers out there, it's not going to change anything. You're not looking at your buttons anymore. However, for a more casual gamer, or for someone who wants to make sure that if they hand this controller to a child or someone visiting their household is going to be able to use it effectively, that is maybe something to think about. And lastly, the one big unanswered question at this point in the review process is how long will these buttons last over time? Is this something that after a year of heavy use, the buttons are going to be starting to be less responsive? That is always a possibility, and unfortunately, I can't answer that question today. However, if you're in the market for a slightly premium controller with very responsive buttons, a very unique feel to it, and the fact that you can actually swap the faceplates and maybe eventually 3D print your own faceplates, then this controller is definitely getting a huge thumbs up from me, and it is now one of the top controllers I've tested on the Nintendo Switch. And at least for the moment is taking the second spot right below my 8BitDo Ultimate. I'm not quite ready to replace it yet as the top controller. So now hopefully this review has been useful to you. Let me know what you think of this controller. Is there anything I missed? Is there anything you'd like me to test out in the future? Also, on the way out, don't forget that if you did like the content, hit that like button, subscribe if you aren't already, and click on the notification bell so you know when all my future content comes out. And as usual, I hope I'll see you in my next video.